Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on such topics as leadership, diversity, communication skills, and how to be a functioning human in this world. Before we go into our fascinating conversation with today's guest, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by taking our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where your presentation skills are strong and where perhaps a little bit of support could help you get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is a colleague from the United Kingdom named Cassandra Rix, otherwise known as Cass. She and I have been working together for about 1.5 years on a project helping to make a team into the team everybody wants to work on. And I have been over and over impressed by the wonderful things that Cass comes up with, how she finds persistence and perception and compassion in this. And also, she started out as a singer who then lost her voice because of barriers that she herself put up, which has a lot to do with the general themes of this podcast, where we are helping to get more people's voices out into the world, especially women in male-dominated industries. The official bio is that Cassandra Rix built her career in frontline service and leadership, evolving a gift to deeply understand, challenge, coach, and nurture into a personal philosophy and approach which facilitates you to know your own story, own the truth of who you are, and evolve behavior to achieve your full potential. She's most recently led people and teams across Cello Health, defining and delivering integrated people strategies, aligning management approaches and leadership principles across capabilities. Her frontline input into recruitment, well-being, and performance management has been pivotal in guiding cultural change and actively addressing organizational challenges. Cassandra remains committed to the success of thriving global businesses of any size, and her straightforward approach takes leadership challenges head-on, puts role modeling front and center for talent engagement, and asks businesses to look beyond the traditional leadership assertions to the real questions that need answering, which is where change happens outside the comfort zone. She has a passion and a belief in continually evolving culture and collective conscience in business, and she uses her intuition as a superpower to deeply connect with individuals and leadership teams, bringing resonance to challenging environments and opening hearts and minds to build rewarding interpersonal relationships, which are the bedrock of organizational achievement. We had a very interesting conversation about voice and losing one's voice and the necessity for caring for the gifts you have, whether it be your body, your family, your voice, or else you'll lose them. And then we went on to discuss how to be a better leader, how to have compassion and understand team dynamics. We were just getting going when we ran out of time. I'll have to bring her back because we could have gone for another hour, but don't fear. It was a lovely conversation, and I know that you will enjoy. Cassandra Rix, Cass, all those S's. I am so happy I've finally got you onto Speakers Who Get Results. Welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be invited.
Well, and to be transparent, since we've been working together for a year and a half now, I was just waiting for the right moment. So I'm glad we finally got the chance. Before I get into the official subject of our interview, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you were to interview someone who's not with us at the moment, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
So my dream interview would in fact be my paternal grandmother.
Your father's mother.
My father's mother, who traveled across the whole of Europe during the end of the Second World War from Poland as a Polish Catholic, sleeping in, as far as I know, sheds, barns, people's lofts, cellars, in order to find her way to her husband, who was serving in the British Army, the British Air Force, actually, and eventually met him in Scotland and eventually settled in the south of England, in what is now quite a huge Polish community in Surrey, actually. So I would interview her because I think her story is fascinating and awe-inspiring and terrifying, and because she also is enormously influential in how my father taught me to be a woman and what my father believed strength and character to be about. He was very influenced by his mother and his mother's story. What would I want to ask her? I'd want to ask her about how she felt during all the stories that I've heard about her, because what I always heard about was what she did and how amazing it was, how she spoke 7 different languages because she had to survive, and the strength and fierceness that she then operated the rest of her life in as a result of her experience, which I think she was probably 19 at the most, as a young woman would have been, as we would have described now, very traumatic and caused an awful lot of reasons for her to behave a particular way. But I never knew how she felt, and feelings were something that were never really spoken about in my family, or certainly around me. Feelings and emotions were things that I held on to. And who should be listening other than me, because I desperately would love to hear how she felt? My daughter and her generation of young women. My daughter's 15. Her generation of young women who have a very conflicted view of what feminine strength is, and can understandably be very confused by what my ancestors portrayed as strength and femininity, and what I have strived to find as a balance between strength and femininity, or whatever strength in femininity is. Myself, I would desperately love to really know. And I'd say my dad as well, because although he's passed away, I'm sure he would be listening. Yeah. And he probably never really asked her those questions.
I'm curious, did she already know your grandfather when she took this trek?
She did. And based on dates, I think she knew him quite well before she made the trek. And I think I don't know enough to be able to say she definitely made it for him, but he was definitely a reason why she believed that she could settle here and did everything that she possibly could to be safe. Someone has her diary somewhere, which is written entirely in Polish. And I hope one day I get my hands on it so it can be translated.
That's fascinating.
It would be amazing. It would be one of those war stories like The Choice, I think, that we read about now.
The reason I was curious is because I know people who were part of the German-speaking Poles who got pushed out of Poland when they had to make room for all the Polish-speaking Russians after the war when the borders changed and a whole bunch of Poles got pushed out of Russia. And then anybody who spoke German, a Pole who lived in Poland but spoke German, got pushed into Germany to make room for the other. I had wondered if she was maybe part of that wave.
Yeah, I would guess so, because she had to leave. She definitely spoke German. The place that my father was born, in fact, in the end, is now part of Germany rather than Poland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she obviously decided that if she could go east or she could go west.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that sounds like a fascinating interview. I would love to be there. But today I'd like to ask you about, we've talked a lot, you and I, about perception and compassion and team dynamics. And I know, but I want to start out with voice, because both you and I work on helping women get their voices heard. And you trained as a singer, and now you support and defend those who don't have a voice, quote unquote, but you actually lost your physical voice at one point, and that is relevant to the sort of work that you do. Could you tell us that story?
Yes, I was about to say I would love to, and then I was checking with myself, is that true? And Elizabeth, you know me very well, so you know I frequently check in with myself. Am I actually telling the truth, or am I just weaving a story, which is something that always strikes me as important when I think about how I use my voice. It's become quite a characteristic of how I operate in the world. So yes, I have always had a resonant, a loud voice. Particularly a resonating singing voice. So at a very young age at school, it was evident that I was louder than everybody else in the choir and in tune, which is always a nice combination rather than the alternative.
Fortunately, yes.
Fortunately, I would be the person singing in the chapel. I went to two convent schools as a child, actually. I would be the person singing in the chapel that everybody would turn around and look at in the middle of a hymn or whatever. And through my younger years, probably up until I was 11, this was noticed generally. And then I had a particular woman, a lady named Margaret Sangster, who's still alive now and who now lives in Scotland. She heard me sing as a new music teacher to our school and said to me, to my teachers and my mother, you have to do something about Cassie's voice. And actually saying Cassie is quite important, because I don't refer to myself as Cassie at all anymore. It's the name that my parents gave me. I was known by at school. And up until I was about 21, maybe 22, I was known at pretty much everywhere. People would call me Cassie. And I discovered I have two things, actually. One is an ability to sing, mainly without any accompaniment. I frequently find myself singing completely a cappella to anything. I have an amazing memory for words and conversations, and therefore lyrics. So I don't just hear the first bar of something and I'll know what song it is. I will also know the words and will feel the words before I've heard them. But I also recognize that there was something in the resonance in my voice, which is why my business is called The Resonance Coach, that really did something about how I felt and how others felt. So I was encouraged to find a music teacher and I was lucky enough to be taught by the then retired professor of the Royal Academy of Music. She'd just retired. They hadn't got a replacement for her. I was 11 years old. I could have been traveling to London every day. And she happened to live what is now even closer to me than where my parents lived. She lived a half an hour drive away from my parents' house. And her house, she's no longer alive, God rest her soul. She would have lived 5 minutes away from me now. So by seeing her, I was able to explore what my voice was capable of. And she, as I believe any good vocal coach would say to an 11-year-old girl, I'm not going to teach you how to sing. She taught me to play piano, to really appreciate music, to understand music. And I think I was probably 14 before she allowed me to actually have a voice lesson. Because she was utterly determined that my voice would not be ruined or strained or broken. And she effectively said, well, you could go to the Royal Academy of Music, or I'll take you on as a private pupil, because I'm doing that now. And I was lucky enough to become a very close friend. I always felt like she was my surrogate grandmother. And she and I had many conversations, it's a very long way of telling the story, but many conversations in my teens about my voice and what it might be capable of. Because my voice was always without much vibrato at all, and still remains like that now. It's quite a full resonant sound, regardless of where I was singing in my range. And that, as you know better than anybody, Elizabeth, can be wonderful and can be not fashionable or can be unwanted. So we always knew that my voice was something that was very powerful and had a capability to make people feel, including me, like a real, you know, when you hear a song that means something to you and it's really apposite and can make you smile or cry, my voice has always had that effect on people I don't know, on my closest family. And I always, well, now, upon reflection, put that down to the resonance in it that meant it lacked a lot of vibrato. It had a very full sound. And what effectively happened is that I sang everywhere and anywhere. I sang at charity balls. I sang at school. I got a scholarship to the school my daughter now goes to because of my voice. I was singing in that school before I was even a pupil because they wanted to showcase my voice. And I loved singing. I loved the fact that I could switch my voice on whenever I wanted to. And I will now be honest enough to say that I completely took it for granted. I believe in some form of God or higher power, a God-given gift. And I just thought it would always show up. And although I continued to have singing lessons into my teens, then into my 20s, and as my life got more complicated as they do, I started to practice less and take care of my voice less and do other more interesting things. At least that's what I thought. And I particularly remember a pivotal conversation I had with a man who became my husband. He's my ex-husband. He's my daughter's father. I'm still very close to him, where I was talking about going back to music school and spending time really in harnessing my voice to sing. And he said to me, but what are you going to do about getting married and having children? And at the time I wasn't in a relationship with him. He was definitely sharing with me his own agenda. It was one of those Freudian slips. And I asked myself that question and I went, oh, I don't think I can have it all. And I remember a moment of, maybe I won't make it anyway. I always had a backup plan. I was going to be a math teacher. I never was, but I always had a backup plan because I knew that being an opera singer was like anything in the fame game. It was so reliant on fashion and personal opinion and taste. And also, you know, any potential vulnerability or injury, that I said, I've got a backup plan. And I decided that I would continue to sing, but I no longer invested in my voice. And I would say that would be time, money, effort, energy. I still saw my singing teacher and I would sing with her when I chose to. I was about to say could, that would be a lie, when I chose to. And over the course of the years, as various different things happened to me, as I had a child, as I divorced, as my life changed, and as I became, and this is probably one of the pivotal parts that I notice now, as I became more and more independent as a woman, financially, physically.
Well, as a woman with a booming career, right?
I ended up in strategy consulting. I worked in an entirely male-dominated organization. I was one woman amongst 15 men. I continued to work in that space. And I knew that I had to be a particular version of myself, or at least I thought I had to be a particular version of myself, related to my paternal grandmother, that said, you have to be hard, you have to be strong. I remember one person saying to me when my daughter was about 5 or 6, he said, I didn't even know you had children. I remember that moment. Because the way that I operated was I would make my life work around my career. And somewhere in that, what I considered to be a very feminine part of me, which is my voice, my ability to open my heart and my soul, started to suffer. Because I was wearing, and I've said this to you many times, I was wearing a very shiny, almost invisible, tight-fitting suit of armor everywhere I went. And it was really heavy. And I had to shout quite loud to get my voice out of it. Not heard, I was always heard, But through the barriers I was creating, I had to do some things that didn't sound very much like beautiful vocal tone. And in the end, I started to lose my singing voice. My voice range now is lower than it ever was before. Now that comes with age anyway, but certainly I've learned recently I have an injury in my vocal cords, which has caused referred nodules. And somewhere in there, I just carried on doing things that meant I wasn't nurturing or looking after my own voice, the thing that matters the most to me. And eventually I lost my voice, so I couldn't sing at all.
So how does that inform what you do now?
I think there are two major things. One is I have become very clear about what my purpose is. And the way that I work with women and men and teams is always about, what are you here for? What is the service you are meant to offer the world, rather than what can you get? Now, we operate in a world where money is the way we make meaning of things, and it's the energy of exchange in our world. But I actually now understand that accessing wealth is a side effect of doing what brings you joy and what is of service to others. So I did a lot of work on myself to understand, who really am I? Which part of this is a mask or a suit of armor that I'm wearing? And if I'm supposed to use this gift, this voice of mine, to allow you to feel, and once somebody said to me that my singing and my speaking voice has the effect of clearing cobwebs and dust away. So when I then ask you a question like, what's really going on, Elizabeth? That will give you'll understand what I mean by that question, even if you can't answer it. There's something about that. So I'm still able to use my voice, although I don't sing. But the starting point for me is, what am I here to do? And what's this other person here to do? What is your purpose? When you wake up in the morning, what do you get out of bed for? Because none of us really do it for money or fame. We do it because we believe there's someone who we can serve in some way. And my ability to talk about three things. One, pretending to be something you're not is the highway to hell. You will suffer, there will be pain, and you will lose things that are very dear to you. Nothing is so owed to you that you don't have to care for it. Your body, your voice, your relationships, your talents. They might be God-given talents, but if you ignore them, they might suffer.
Let me just rephrase that, if you will, especially for our international listeners. You use a very circuitous phrase. Any talents you have or blessings you have must be cared for, worked on. Yes. Curated, nurtured, if you will.
Curated. Because if I don't believe that my voice is of enough value to care for it, then why will it always show up for me? Yeah. And I think we could say about our relationships with anything, my relationship to my body, my relationship to my partner, my daughter, and myself. And my voice has become an absolute mirror of my relationship to myself and how much I care about myself.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So let me ask you, from the philosophical to the specific here. Talking about speaking up for yourself. You were telling me the other day about a situation you were in where you discovered that the new man on your team who was working for you was earning $30,000 more than you were. Now, this is something that I don't know about 30,000, but this is something that many people find. What did you do? What actions did you take?
First, I checked in with myself and made sure I did not let it affect my relationship with him. So that's an inaction, if you like, but it's a decision, and it's an important one. Because whilst we might accept salaries, we are not necessarily the people who determine what they are. I went straight into a conversation with my my line manager and also my then CEO. So I could have circumnavigated my manager and went straight to the CEO. And I thought, no, I need to go to him and the CEO, and I need to have some very specific conversations. And I come from a place that always starts with understand. So I want to tell you how I feel about this, but first I would like to understand why you have made this decision. And I believe that when you ask somebody to explain themselves, you need to shut up.
Yeah.
And our tendency is to ask a question and then to interrupt because they're not saying things the way we want them to say them.
Mm-hmm.
So what I discovered was a lot of interesting beliefs around what people should be paid based on what they were paid in the last job they did.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered a lot of their beliefs about how, and many of us might experience it, how people who are already in organizations just get paid a little bit more to make them stay. But when you're trying to attract new talent to the team, you might attract them with a bit more cash or a bit more whatever incentive there might be. And then I asked the question, when I heard that, I asked the question, so what does length of service, I used the word tenure, and how long you've been here and how much you've proven you have value, and seniority. And I asked it deliberately in those three ways, because I don't think you should start with I'm more senior, so I should earn more money. Because actually it's about responsibility. What about tenure? What about the experience you have of me? What about the fact that we operate a transparent, which I think is great, salary policy in our organization? So I know that you've decided to pay this person who's going to be on my team more. Why was I not involved in that conversation? Is that because you didn't think I'd like it? And they were honest enough to say yes. And then I said, what would it take for me to earn what you are proposing to pay this person who needs to go through probation and be proven anyway? What would it take? Because I'm trying to understand, with the level of responsibility I have in this organization, including in the model I was in, needing to feed him work so he works because I'm selling the work, what would I need to do? And they couldn't answer the question, which told me a lot. So I try not to jump to conclusions, but I thought, well, if you can't tell me what it is going to take, then you don't know what it's going to take. And then I said this, and I still ask myself, should I have said this? Is this the right thing to have said? He said, I'm asking you to pay me at least what you pay him, because you're asking me to be responsible for his development in this organization. And then I said, because I would hate to think that anything of this had to do with the fact that I am a woman. And I left it there. And I do feel the intensity of that statement. I do feel the level of goading, you could say, was with that statement. But I wanted to say, this is how it feels to me. You might not intend it, but the impact, and I talk a lot about us using phrases like, well, I didn't mean to, and thinking that that's an apology. It's not. I need to apologize for what I did, not for what I intended. You may not have intended to, but the impact on me was that it means you don't think I'm worth as much as somebody you don't know. That's an interesting belief. But also, is it because I'm a woman? Because there is so much evidence that tells us that women don't ask for pay rises, that don't ask for promotions, because societally we are conditioned to stay quiet and be nice and not ask for things. So having someone like me, who's quite straightforward, saying, I don't think so.
You did say to me when you first told me this story that he got that much money because he asked. And they said, okay. And they gave it to him. Yeah. They didn't really think about it. He asked for it, which chances are a woman would not.
No. We tend to ask what the salary is. In fact, I remember I had an apprentice last year and the year before, and she actually said to me, I want to ask you for the upper range of the salary that you've advertised this at. I hope you don't mind. And I said to her, genuinely, I am extremely proud to be recruiting somebody who's brave enough to ask that question. Good. Because at 22, I wouldn't have done it.
I wouldn't have either. Yeah.
And if I think about it, if I hadn't been in a managerial position, managing someone that I was aware was earning more than me, I'm not sure I would have said it either. It came from a place of indignance rather than self-worth. Now it comes from somewhere else.
Okay. So this is a situation that people find themselves in a lot. What tips can you give? What strategies can you suggest to the next person, to the person who's listening to this podcast saying, oh, that's where I am, but I don't know what to do?
The first thing is a thing about yourself. And I think all of our actions need to come from a centered and grounded place. We often act out of impulse, emotion, and there's nothing wrong with impulse or emotion. They are critical. They're important, very important. And they're also, what do they call it? They're clues. How you're feeling is a clue. So ask yourself the question, why am I angry? Why do I feel undervalued? Why do I feel I don't matter? And particularly around money, ask yourself the question, is it really about the money?
Okay.
Because if you go into a conversation saying, and I don't think anybody would necessarily do this, so-and-so's earning more money than me, that's not fair. That probably doesn't set you up for any kind of success. You've got to ask yourself the question, what is it I'm angry about? And my anger and frustration was, you don't know if this person is capable, agnostic of whether they were male, female, anything to do with that. You don't know that. I'm responsible for this person's development. So in some way, I'm responsible for them. Leadership is about responsibility for others. And so what that says to me is the value that I'm bringing by being responsible for him and having been here for longer and assume I'm doing a good job, is that you're not telling me that I matter. And actually underneath that, you haven't considered that I might mind. Actually, It's not about the money. And when you then go to someone with not, you've done this, it's not fair, but you go with, I'm feeling this way, and I've asked myself why, and it's because it's telling me that I don't matter as much to you because you haven't consulted me and you're paying someone more than someone you've never worked with before.
So let me ask another question then. As we're talking about this, I'm thinking now if we have Cass, the coach, supposing you were advising that leadership team, and they found themselves having made this big mistake, what would you tell the leaders to do in a situation like this?
Well, there are some details underneath it, but there are two things, and they're the same thing I would say to myself if I had upset my daughter, you if you'd upset your friends, your partner, anybody, is this. Do two things. One, apologize for the impact that you've had, the lack of consideration that you realize that you have shown, and the resulting feeling the other person has. We're not responsible for how other people feel, but we can certainly create situations where they are likely to feel certain things. So one, apologize, and don't apologize and say, and I did it because, just say sorry.
Okay.
Two, make it right.
I love that.
Because an apology without a change in behavior is not an apology. And we're not talking about me forgetting to do something occasionally and needing to be reminded. We're talking about other members of my organization that I give responsibility to lead other people and sit in front of clients and make money for me. If I haven't thought, what might the impact be on Cass, Elizabeth, whoever, I've made a big mistake, because if I'm not doing that for this, what else am I not considering them for? My mentor has a great phrase, which comes from yogic philosophy, which is how you do one thing is how you do everything. It just manifests in different ways. If you don't consider the impact on other people about being late, not doing things, you do that everywhere.
I think that's I was going to add that too.
And the make it right is the other thing, that take responsibility.
So this also brings me to my next question, which was that you and I have talked a lot about putting yourself in the shoes of your listeners. I always say that it's rule number one, if you are presenting, if you're leading, is to use strategic empathy, put yourself in their shoes. You've talked a lot about compassion. How does putting yourself in someone else's shoes extend to having compassion in one's day-to-day interactions? And to follow that up, how can you be compassionate without lying down and letting someone walk all over you? Where's the balance?
Yeah. Oh my goodness, isn't that hard? So I think let me answer the question about that, or
you answer the first question, but you know where I'm going to tell you where I'm going with this.
Yeah. So remember that being in someone else's shoes is not the same as them being in their shoes.
Say that one again.
Being in someone else's shoes just means you've got their shoes on and they don't fit you. Real empathy and compassion is about being them in their shoes.
Ooh, okay.
So, we often say, and I don't know how much we say this in other languages, but it's so often used in English, which is, if I was you, if I were you, if I were in your shoes, if it were me, which is very true. It's how we connect with people. But the truth is that if I were you, I wouldn't do any of the things you're doing, because I'm not you.
Right.
I need to understand, why are you doing your things? Then I'm being in your shoes, really. Ooh. And that for me, and that the reason I answered that way is because that for me is compassion. Okay. That for me is understanding why you're doing it as you, but still being over here in order to help you. The best quote that I've ever heard is that sympathy is about getting in the pit with someone when they're in the pit. And then guess what? You're both in the pit and no one's getting out. Compassion, real empathy, is standing outside of the pit, holding out my hand to you and saying, I'm here, but you need to take my hand. And you need to want to get out.
I love that. Okay, good. Yes.
So, and then I don't get walked all over, because the chances are I get in the pit with you. You stand on my head to get out of the pit if you really want to.
Yes.
I'm not the vehicle for you to get out of the pit. I'm the person that says to you, there are plenty of hands out here that will help you. And compassion for me is twofold. One is, it's understanding why people do what they do. What is their story? What's their trigger? If mine is that strength is doing everything on my own and never asking for help, then what's someone else's? And really understanding that and accepting it. And then two is behaving in a way that means they don't have to do what I say. I've just offered them some choices. I've offered them agency. I've offered them the opportunity to do it differently.
So this is we've got a couple minutes left. How can you do that when you are managing up? How can you do that with the people who are supervising you, whom you think are in the pits, and that you would rather you wish you could tell them what they were supposed to do because they're not doing it?
We'd love to do that, wouldn't we? I think part one, which comes from a place, it's the same thing as understanding, is assume that everybody's doing their best all of the time. Always. Even those people who are more senior than you, or have got authority over you, or your bosses or whatever, and you go, I could do that so much better than you. Well, maybe you could, but you know what? That's not your job. So one, I always assumed, even if I didn't like it, that what that person was doing was what they believed was the best at the time. And then I have a positive mindset to say, okay, so why would that person do that? Why would so-and-so think that's okay? And the answer might be, let me think about the example we were talking about earlier. They're going to pay him what he's asked for because we don't have enough people to do the work here at the moment. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm stacked with work, and they want to give me someone I can pass work to. And they want to make sure that person is capable. And maybe they associate capable with well paid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's giving someone the benefit. And you know what? That is what the benefit of the doubt is about. It's not about making excuses for people. It's about saying, if I believe you're doing the best thing you think is right, what's your rationale? And it won't be the same as mine.
Right.
We were talking about a moment ago. So to manage up, they're doing their best. They didn't get out of bed that day to make your day hell. That's not what they did. They got out of bed that day to do their best.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to actively manage up, then I start with wanting to understand that and not taking responsibility for it. But okay, so what's causing this level of stress? What's meaning that they're behaving like I don't know, we all behave like petulant children sometimes, being a bit difficult or inconsiderate. And then what can I do to help solve that? Not fix it, not make you better, but what can I do? What can I bring to that table? And you know what? Sometimes it's as simple as making them a cup of tea. Showing, yes. We often make the mistake with leaders of treating them the way that we are being treated by them, rather than the way we want to be treated. We can make this excuse that goes, well, you're doing this to me, so I'll do this to you. Start with kindness. Start with assuming they're doing their best, and start by saying, what could I do to make it a bit easier for them today?
That sounds like a perfect note to finish on. Thank you. Thank you. Cassandra Rix, Cass, thank you so much for having been the guest on Speakers Who Get Results. We will be posting all sorts of information about how you can reach her in the show notes. So thank you very much, my friend. I may have to bring you back in 6 months or so to delve into some of these questions a little deeper. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and I will see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.